Thanks. Well, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
So they asked us to come and open up the conversation about new technologies, but not new technologies in general in fintech, because I've been thinking that this whole consulting thing might not last that long. Once AI comes along, we're basically finished. So I need to sort of look at some other opportunities. I thought crime might be the best opportunity. So I thought I'll try and pick up a few tips about financial crime. So we've got 3 experts here to help me out. And so we're going to talk about new technology, but in that context. So I'd make notes on this if I was you. It could be very useful stuff coming up here. Now, given the variety of new technologies that are available, we thought, we were asked if we could cover, it was all sorts of things, wasn't it? It was like sort of AI and quantum computers and block. So I thought probably the best way to deal with this and the way to make best use of your time, I was listening to the previous presentation, is we need to find out which technologies people talk the most stupid things about, and then we can try and talk some sense about them. So I'm not sure what you feel about this. So I think perhaps we should probably ask the audience about this sort of thing. So who thinks people say the most stupid things about blockchain? Who thinks people say stupid things about blockchain? If you don't think this, you've not been paying attention, to be completely honest. I haven't heard anybody say anything about the blockchain that's not stupid for some considerable time, so I think you're wrong about that. Who thinks people say stupid things about artificial intelligence? Oh, come on, everybody says stupid things about artificial intelligence all the time. You haven't been to many tech conferences. You get out a lot? You don't go to many of these things? Who thinks people say stupid things about quantum computing? Come on, everybody says stupid things about quantum computing. Nobody in this room knows what quantum computing is. You wouldn't even know if people were saying stupid things about it because nobody knows what it is. That's a really bad example to talk about. I don't know if we'll spend too much time on that one. And who thinks people say really stupid things about crime and criminals? I do too. So I think the first thing we need to establish is when we're talking about financial crime, you see, these people are thinking about sort of Bonnie and Clyde and bank robbers and stuff like that. But that's the old days, when the people who robbed banks didn't work for them. That was a different era. We're talking about a different... So just before we start, can you just be a little clear to the people here what you mean when you're talking about financial crime?
Sure, I'll start. Well, certainly at Nasdaq, I work in their market tech division, where there's a lot of reg tech, surveillance tech. And actually, we're monitoring white-collar crime, essentially, largely. It's institutions who are potentially committing insider dealing or market manipulation, or actually money laundering as well, that come through corporate vehicles. So it's not your typical, career criminal. Quite often, these people are opportunistic, or it's a chain of events. Actually, what you also see is that it's usual course of dealing in organizations. It's just the way it's always been done. And the way that regulation has come up is encroaching on that, and technology means you can start to look at how people are doing things in a new way and start to reveal these kinds of behaviors that are happening in our workplaces.
So when you say crime, you're talking about big stuff. People robbing banks is nothing. I think in the UK, the average amount stolen in a bank robbery is about £3,000 or something. And I think there's a 90% chance of getting caught, and the average sentence for armed robbery is longer than it is for murder. So robbing banks is a pretty stupid thing to do. Whereas insider dealing, money laundering, market manipulation, these are much better crimes, right? I should focus on those, is what you're telling me.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the kind of crime you're looking at?
So I'm with buguroo, and we are looking at digital identity assurance, really. So, looking at different aspects of who is involved in a session. It could be behavioral analytics, it can be location, device, networks, things like that. Obviously, all of that cannot even be done without AI or machine learning or deep learning as well. But also, at the same time, the problem actually comes from those techniques, because at the past we couldn't do that without, fraudster, as I said, would physically need to go and rob a bank.
Yeah.
It doesn't really need to do it.
No, it doesn't. Physically robbing banks doesn't scale. I'm not interested in that. But you say identity theft, identity fraud, those are good opportunities for me as well, because those are big. And they're out of control. They're growing out of control. So those are good. Synthetic identity theft is, this year's big thing, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, that's a good, okay, I'm thinking about it. Joost, over at the central bank, what kind of things are you looking at?
Well, mostly money laundering, of course, and the finance of terrorism.
And so money laundering, that's a crime, you're saying?
It's basically the oil in the machine of organized crime worldwide. If
Right.
you look
And
at
investment banking, that's not...
and investment banking,
Yeah.
yes.
Disorganized crime,
about
we call
3% of global GDP consists of money laundering. So in many ways, it's one of the top 10 economies in the world. So if you want to pick a career in crime.
Okay, so I think I'm going to focus on money laundering. I mean, that sounds like the best opportunity for me at the moment. And so what do we do about money laundering at the moment? We have KYC, AML, CTF, PEP. It's all quite straightforward stuff. Don't worry about what it all means. But the way we do it now is we have really complicated, really expensive, time-consuming KYC to keep bad guys out of the system. And then if the bad guys get into the system, what do? We fill out suspicious transaction reports or something, or what?
Yeah, the gold thing. Well, I'm from the fraud side of things, but in I think we call it suspicious activity reports, and then...
Yes, and in the Netherlands, we even have an extra category of unusual transactions. So even transactions that don't qualify as suspicious, but still are unusual or potentially suspicious, get sent to the FIU.
Okay, good. So now, I think the cost benefit here, so if you look at the Europol figures, the guy that was the head of Europol said European banks spend, actually I can't remember what the number is, 20 billion euros or something on KYC, AML every year. So European banks spend about 20 billion euros a year on KYC, AML, and they intercept approximately, I can't remember, but I think it's naught of the fraudulent funds, isn't it? Or I think they said 0.15%. Which, to me, if somebody came to you and said, congratulations, the system's detecting 0.15%, you would hear naught, right, wouldn't you? You'd hear naught and then you'd fire them. But that's because we live in a world of cost-benefit, which is a bit different. So I think I'm looking at money laundering as the best option. So what technologies are you guys going to use to do something about money laundering?
But I think in any organization, you've got to look at the whole toolkit. It's not just going to be one. And you have to, this is why people talk a lot of nonsense about AI, as if it can solve everything. And of course, it's a tool that is very good in a specific circumstance and can deliver enormous benefits, but it isn't the only answer. So what we need to do is actually, what the previous speaker talked about, is really understand what the people are trying to achieve. People are trying to integrate lots of different pieces of information to understand the picture of what's going on. And lots of different technologies will enable us to do that. I think AI's got huge potential, but until you understand what people are trying to do to solve the problem, it's not going to be a very useful tool. But let's hear from the other panelists of what they think is a good way forward.
Well, I think technology can help greatly in reducing financial crime, but like you say, it's not a magic wand. It's more or less of a toolkit that can be put to good use under the right conditions. And at the moment, especially when it comes to AI, although it holds great promise, there are still some preconditions that need to be put in place to really get the best out of it.
And I guess, if you look at a single transaction, so probably you don't need AI, right? But that's not the world, and this is not the regulatory requirements nowadays. So you need to look at kind of entity or link analysis, and you need to look at the relations between different entities, and you need to look at previous activities that coming from those entities. There is no way to do it, manually with pen and paper, right? Obviously, those are a lot of insane size data sets, and you need sophisticated AI, and again, machine learning, deep learning, whatever buzzword you want to use, in order to actually make sense of that data, and obviously report and eliminate false positive, because that's essentially another problem that we're trying to help with, right?
Yeah, but you're still not saying, so how exactly are quantum computers going to help? That was my question.
You said earlier no one knows what quantum computing is.
I know, so you can say anything. Nobody knows. You can say whatever you like. So quantum computers will be 1 million times faster than normal computers. So what impact will that have on crime?
So again, it's about, I mean, speed is important, isn't it?
Yeah, but
I mean,
how-
that's as we already heard, that's one of our least, that's something we have the least of. So, and that's why AI is now coming up, because we now have computing power. You know, I set out 20 years ago thinking about how behavioral science, data and technology might improve human decision making. And, you know, behavioral science has come a long way in the last 20 years. Actually, it's just as well that, you know, we've still been learning on that journey, because computing power has taken quite a long time to catch up. AI was talked about in the 60s, but computing power didn't allow it to happen, and we didn't have the data sets. So we're at this kind of turning point where we can now start to think about how do we use technology to crunch the data we have. But I was reading Nate Silver's book, Signal in the Noise, and he says, you know, that people think the answer is in data, but people imbue data with meaning, and his quote is, before we ask more of our data, we need to ask more of ourselves. So we need to think hard about what are the problems we're trying to solve here? What technology is really going to enable that? And speed is definitely going to be the answer, because it's that, let's make tech that works for people, is what we're trying to say. It does work for them, but works in a way that enables them to use their intelligence. And so the speed can do the robotic kind of stuff, it can do the simple stuff that we know what it's going to do, and it can free up people to do what they're really good at and think hard about problems that haven't been solved yet. And criminals are always changing, they're always adapting.
Yeah, but the point is, if the criminals get computers that are 1 million times faster, and we get computers that are 1 million times faster, well, it doesn't really matter. I mean, that's still a draw, right? That's not going to change the sort of landscape. So I think quantum, we can probably stop thinking about that for the moment, except for, I mean, there are going to be some amusing aspects to quantum computing, of course, because quantum computing means that we'll break the public key encryption that's used now. So everything that's secret now won't be secret anymore once we've got a quantum computer. And that will be fun, right? That will greatly add to the gaiety of humankind. But I'm not sure it's going to change the crime. It means we'll be able to read everybody's Instagram messages and so on, but, you know, it's just Jennifer Aniston and stuff like that. Who cares? So, all right, let me try again. How is blockchain going to affect crime then? Because blockchain is immutable. So immutable. That's not working. This is. I warned you against nuanced and philosophical answers for an audience like this at this time in the morning. How can I use blockchain to be better at money laundering or other crimes? What's blockchain actually going to do?
That's an interesting way to put it.
Oh yeah, no, it's be my guest.
Well, no, but these people want practical answers. It's all very well saying blockchain's going to end human trafficking or whatever it is I saw in the paper this morning. But I mean,
I think when you talk about we want to stop financial crime,
I don't.
That's half of
do.
the sentence, isn't it? It's we want to stop financial crime and ensure that our financial institutions are really efficient and deliver great service. And people flow through that, and some of those people are doing the right thing, some people are doing the wrong thing. And when you're looking at human behavior, you're either trying to block it, deter it, or support it. There's kind of three, we boil it down to the whole of behavioral science to that. I was on a panel with Nick Leeson recently, and he was talking about the fact that I think he was at Morgan Stanley before he was at Barings. And when he was at Morgan Stanley, if at the end of the day your positions didn't match, you couldn't trade the next day. He was blocked. He went to Barings, and that wasn't the case, or he could navigate around the system. So his positions didn't match. He got told to call up London by a very scary boss and tell him what a cock-up he'd made. He had 5 hours in which he decided he wasn't going to do that, he was going to try and fix it himself. And he could keep trading. So he wasn't blocked. So the question is, the challenge in all of this is how can, blockchain, if you get transparency and you can have a great audit trail and you can see what people are doing, you can begin to map how people are navigating the system that we operate in. Like the first chap or second chap who was showing a map of how his teams and compliance teams are actually dealing with the KYC process. The more we can understand what people are really doing, the more we can dig into areas where you have friction or you have bottlenecks, and you can design better technology to support it. So it's how do you make it harder for people to kind of get it, circumnavigate, which we're all trying to do because people are smart, and let people who are trying to do the right thing
Okay, so
get through.
So if we put things on the blockchain, that makes them more transparent because people can see what's going on, right? That's the argument, yeah. So, but that means criminals can see what's going on as well, right? So if you put all your data on the blockchain, so I was at a thing, actually an insurance tech thing, and some guys said, we're going to use the blockchain to revolutionize insurance, and it sounded quite interesting because it needs revolutionizing, really. And so, and the guy said, well, we're going to, you get your valuables and you record them on the blockchain, and then if your house burns down or you get burgled, the insurance company can just go to the blockchain with smart contracts, something immutable or whatever, and automatically pay out. And I said, but if you list all your blockchain, if you list all your valuables on the blockchain, I can guarantee you're going to get burgled. I mean, isn't that like that's the most obvious way to get burgled, would be to list all of your valuables on the blockchain. So transparency, that's a little bit of a double-edged sword, I think, isn't it? I mean, the financial markets couldn't work with real transparency.
And they don't necessarily want it either.
No, exactly. So
but from a regulator perspective, it's about security as well, I would imagine.
Well, of course, but the interesting thing about blockchain, to me at least, is it has been part of the problem when it comes to financial crime in the sense of cryptocurrencies. And it holds a lot of potential in being part of the solution. But over the last couple of years, at least, I haven't seen any specific initiatives in that regard.
Yeah.
So until and when blockchain actually provides tangible solutions in this area, then of course it could be a beautiful solution, but so far we haven't seen any.
That's what. So do you use the blockchain for anything?
Not really.
No, but you should say you do, because
Yeah, but that will be a lie.
Well, actually, I think my favorite phrase at the moment is people say, it's instead of saying we're using the blockchain, people say we're blockchain inspired, which I think is much better. Like for the investment community. Remember, they don't understand any of these things, so blockchain inspired sounds like the way. Okay, so I'm not sure if that's going to help us very much. So quantum blockchain. All right, so let's come back to this AI thing again, because this sounds promising to me at the moment. Now, for most of the people in the room, most of the organizations that they're working for, who will have said they're investing in AI, what they're really investing in is, broadly speaking, machine learning. We see very little what I would call general purpose AI in there. Is that right, or is that me being just a bit thick about this stuff?
That's my Andrew, you certainly know more about this.
Yeah, well, I agree with you first. Start with that. I mean, I think the problem is that, first we were speaking earlier about AML. Now, in AML, you have quite a few hours to report, right? I think you need to fill this report by the end of the business day or something like that. In fraud, this is not the case, right? I mean, either you have a kind of live transaction now, are you going to block it or not?
Yeah.
Right? So, and I don't know, when I'm in front of an ATM traveling like now, I didn't want my card to be denied just because my banking provider didn't really invest a lot of money in their anti-fraud tool. So again, and let's come back again to quantitative, etc. Yeah.
But is it fair to say, broadly speaking, that stuff works? So in other words, the investments have gone into ML because there isn't really any general purpose AI. Mm-hmm. Most of those ML investments have gone into anti-fraud. Mm-hmm. And actually, they kind of work. Because if you shovel in enough data, the algorithms are not that bad. It's working pretty well, right?
It is, yeah.
So it gives us a basis for, So this is telling me card fraud and whatever is...
This could be card fraud, it could be online fraud, which is probably more, to our previous example, that's probably more relevant nowadays.
It's just not enough money. I mean, basically, we've managed to ship most of our card fraud to the US, so we're not that bothered about it.
We're good with that.
Yeah, but it just doesn't add up. So, because you're telling me money laundering is, what did you just say, it's like 10% of the global economy or something?
Well, 3%.
Well, 3%, that's an underestimate. And Europol tell me that they're intercepting none of the fraudulent flows. So money laundering seems like my best bet. So let's have a bit of a rethink. So AI seems to me to be a bit of an event horizon, in the sense that once we actually have real AI in place, not money laundering, it's actually quite hard to see how the financial markets will operate with real AI, right? Because if we're successful at building AIs that are as smart as people, that's a bit of a failure, don't you think? I mean, that's not a high bar. We've got 7 billion already. They're not all that.
No, but the technology is just one part of the equation. The other part is the data. I mean, if you can have the biggest truck in the town, but if you don't have fuel, you're not going to have any fun with it. And if you look at what's needed to actually have that AI work for financial institutions for money laundering prevention, then you need good quality data and you need to have all relevant data. And at the moment, banks are struggling with their legacy systems. There's a lot of data issues. They're only looking through the keyhole to their part of the financial markets, seeing only their customers and their transactions, not all the other networks. So to actually make it work, you need to address those preconditions first before you can successfully apply technology like AI.
But aren't Google, TensorFlow and all this sort of thing, and Google, Amazon, Apple, I mean, they're going to give AI to the criminals, right? So how is your AI going to be better than the criminals' AI?
It will be an arms race, as it has always been, but again, that doesn't fire us from the responsibility to get the most out of our data and to take our responsibility as gatekeepers in case of the bank seriously.
Okay, I asked, so when we're thinking about AI, and I'm trying to think about like the next generation AI, where's it going to get the data from, and how we really, and Wendy, you said connecting people's heads up to AI systems and using magnetic resonance imaging to figure out what people are thinking is probably the next step. Is that you're doing that at Nasdaq already, or?
No, not quite.
Oh, no, okay.
So what I was talking about was the fact, actually, fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, is what neuroscience has been doing for only about the last 20 years. So the ability to actually look inside your brain. And talking about complex technology, it is the most complex technology on the planet. In 1 cubic centimeter of our brains, there are more connections than there are in the stars in the Milky Way. It's pretty cool tech. And what people don't realize, especially when you kind of grow up, is people talk about the brain as an organ, but different parts of the brain do different things in the same way as the heart and the lungs and the kidneys do very different things. So our understanding of how that works is growing and relatively new.
So these kind of headbands that Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and people are talking about, so these headbands will read what you're thinking and feed that directly into the AI. Is that the
Again,
idea?
it's not that simple. But there's awful. You talk about nonsense spoken in AI. There's nonsense spoken in behavioral science and understanding of what people think as well. I was walking along after a conference with a chap who's deep in data science and AI, saying, he's programming to detect deception from reading using emotional recognition on faces. Enforcement services and intelligence services will tell you you can't detect deception from emotional recognition in faces. So there's a lot of nonsense out there. But really, truly understanding the science of how people think, what drives behavior, understanding the constraints in our system, the fact there's legacy technology, legacy data sets that are hard for people to get. How do you make it easier for the people who are working in our institutions that understand how they work to get the information, put it together, and come up to a conclusion? Well, that's what we need to support.
But fMRI already can detect emotional states, can't it? I mean,
absolutely, it can. But what you have to understand is what's driven the emotional state in the first place, and that's what's.
So right now we're talking about like Facebook glasses that when you look at people in the street, they'll look people up on Facebook and tell you all about them and so on. So it's quite a small step from that to Facebook glasses, which will tell you what people are thinking because their glasses are reading their thoughts and that sort of thing. So if this happens, what are the opportunities for crime in that? Because you see, in the UK a couple of weeks ago, there was a big fuss because the police in London said they're going to put up some cameras in London in the street to detect criminals in the street, right? Which in London is quite easy because it's most people out in the street. So that's quite no sane people walk the streets of London. So it's, but there are some dangers with that technology because as my good friend Jamie Bartlett said, if that technology works, it's an absolute disaster for society. But if it doesn't work, it's even worse. It's like you can't win with this stuff, right? So focus it back down on crime. Let's imagine we get to the situation where these people can feed all the data they need into their AIs, including, even what people are thinking using these kind of new interfaces. How are we going to get ahead of the criminals in that kind of environment?
I think it's incredibly difficult because they're not thinking about the ethics behind what we're trying to deal with. And that's a key question that is also up for a huge amount of debate at the moment. And everyone around the world, you know, I was originally a lawyer in the pharmaceutical industry and retrained into psychology. Both of those are dealing with impacts of any kind of technology or intervention on people, which means you have an ethics committee that approves whether or not you can do that kind of exploratory analysis. Actually, the same approach should be being taken when we put any kind of product out there that interacts with people, and how we go about that. The challenge is people are trying to get to market fast. It's a capitalist society. People are trying to make money quickly. And actually, people don't ask that many questions about whether it works or not, or what the potential unintended consequences are, because they're not used to thinking that way. But I'm pleased to see that ethics committees are being debated, and the understanding that we have, there are biases in data, and we need to be a bit more mindful. It's still a challenge, though, because the criminals aren't thinking like that.
But Wendy's right, isn't she? The thing that's missing from the landscape at the moment is this ethical. So many people in the audience are from banks, so I'll just have to explain. Ethics are how you behave when the regulators aren't looking. That's the simplest way to think about it. So just get them up to speed. But Wendy's right on this, isn't she? So the thing that's missing from this, like what's different about us and the criminals, the component, the little bit of the circuitry, the cutout, the stop button or whatever, is something to do with ethics. And somehow this has to become part of the technological landscape, right?
Yeah. Now the EU is the European Union, in case you know. But they...
what was that? Oh, we used to do that. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So they picked it up, I think, last year, and they drafting up kind of... I wouldn't say a regulation around that, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but the kind of principles that you need to follow when you develop AI. And things that, as you could expect, first it needs to comply with GDPR, it's actually there, but also should be transparency, it should be kind of responsibility, so essentially if I develop an AI...
GDPR is a disaster for this, isn't it? Because surely in order for any of this AI stuff to work, you need to be able to share these vast pools of data between... GDPR will just... the criminals won't obey GDPR.
That's correct. And of course, the GDPR sets some limits, but it's indeed about the combination of data to make that work. And that can be done in more than one ways that are also GDPR compliant. But more in general, GDPR has all these exceptions when it comes to societal interests, etc. If you're talking about ethics, when we're talking about financial crime, when we're talking about that 3% GDP, seems like a big number, but it's still kind of abstract. But if you realize...
It is a big number, come on.
Yeah, it is, but if you realize that money are the proceeds of arms trade or of human trafficking, of international drug trade, that's the economy that we're trying to combat. And finding the right trade-off of what we're feeling comfortable with in terms of sacrificing, for instance, or using some kind of technology that might be a bit invasive, that's a discussion to be had, and I think that discussion has not been taking place to the extent that it deserves.
Okay, let's summarize then. So for the next generation of entrepreneurs out there, let's summarize the perspective, if we're looking at it from the financial crime perspective. So basically, the best crime to get into is money laundering. That's much bigger than card fraud and all these sort of things. I would say market manipulation, but that's a lot harder nowadays, isn't it? So, yeah, okay. So money laundering is probably the best crime to get into. If we can persuade people to stick to the current nonsensical, lack of cost-benefit, hopelessly inefficient system of relying on KYC, then as a criminal I might have a chance, because KYC inconveniences good people, but doesn't stop the bad people. So that would be a good focus for me. And I have to do everything I can to stop the entrepreneurs in the audience from bringing ethical components into their new fintech startups. Would that be a rough summary of my best way forward?
The beauty of innovation, though, and people is that they are always trying to solve problems. So that, there's great tech out there that can help share information without breaching privacy, precisely because GDPR threw that obstacle in our way. Okay. So I think there's always hope.
And those headbands that work out what you're thinking.
Yeah, don't buy those.
I'm sure the criminals will find much better uses for them than we will. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, you had a panel of really well-informed people. They didn't know what questions I was going to ask them. They gave you their honest opinions about an important topic. I hope you enjoyed listening to them as much as I did. Thank you very much, everyone.